I mean, when people ask me what I do, I tell them I'm an illustrator. When I think about the kind of art I do, I don't think in terms of that. Just because I do so many different things, and I don't think I'm going to make a comic book today. I'm going to draw some storyboards today. Because so much of it's job based. I'm really just thinking of like what the gig is. When I was a kid, yeah, I was drawing a lot. But it was something to do. I liked doing it. My dad would do it. I didn't look at myself as an artist. Movies and TV shows, they all have sort of ideas of what like an artist is, I always like old movies from the 60s where they had artists because it was just sort of something they did, and it was sort of like backdrop stuff, like it would just be a guy with like a button-up shirt and like rolled up sleeves, and every once in a while like he'd be sort of like working on a painting and stuff. I like that better because it wasn't like a whole thing. There wasn't like an affect really put onto it. Now it's like, even my sort of when I hear the word artist, I sort of envision someone who's not me because they don't act like I do, On the digital end, one of the reasons I resisted it for so long was because I didn't know anybody who did it. I feel now, looking back, that it's more like a misery loves company thing. Like, you can't have something be easy. Something can't be easier to do, because I'm busting my ass, and it's like, that's not fair, I think was really more my attitude. And now it's all about just like whatever it sort of takes to get the job done, because so many of the things that I do now need to be done so quickly. I've always equated it to being like a runner or a swimmer or something, like anything that shaves seconds off time. I used to use India ink and brushes and dipping those and Crow Quill pens, and because that was the legit way to do it. But I mean, after a while you realize like how many seconds that then are added up into minutes and hours and days are spent just the physical act of taking the brush or the pen, putting it in the ink, picking it up, rolling it on a scrap piece of paper, and then making the lines, making like 5 lines until it's dry again, and then I got to do the same thing again. My hesitance to embrace the technology was, for me, it was definitely a young man's point of view. Because, I think at the time I just thought I'd have all the time in the world. As I'm getting older now, I'm not an old man, I'm not saying this like I'm an old man, but, to look at the amount of work that I still want to do. And even if it's, like, for me, it's personal projects, comics that I want to do, stories that I want to make on my own. To look at the amount of time that it's going to take to do them. And the amount of, the amount of work that's going to have to go into it. You reach a point sometimes where you will have more that you want to do than you have time in your life. Because a lot of these fields, you find yourself sort of isolated. They're not ones that necessarily require group effort. Being here in the studio is great because I'm surrounded by artists all day that do things differently than I do. So it's like I'm constantly asking questions. I'm constantly like, well, how do you do that? Or I like the way that you do that. You see somebody do something in a way that, you didn't think about doing, but, sometimes it just seems so simple. It's like, well, why didn't I do it that way before, I think if you're going to trace people or you're going to use like heavy photo reference for your comics, it'd probably be best if you took your own photos. The downside with that though is, I've seen people do it for like superhero comics or comics that have like a fantasy feel, and it still just looks like their friends and neighbors dressed up in costumes. It's like it almost takes on the look of like a school play or something, or like I always think of the movie Be Kind, Rewind, sometimes, because it's like, oh, that's supposed to be Iron Man? That looks like your landlord, wearing cardboard. On the comics end, I don't use a lot of tools. It's still pretty much just like a pencil and an eraser. I use kneaded erasers because when I make my erasures in the sketch stage, they're very light. Like, I still want a little bit of the drawing left. and to use like a heavier, like a hard rubber eraser. I mean, those are just for elimination purposes. Like the kneaded eraser gives you a little bit of a softer erase. Grid rulers are great for setting up panel borders and stuff like that. As far as pencils go, I mean, I just use whatever mechanical pencils I pick up. I mean, I use HB leads though, just because it's a nice middle. It's not too soft that it smudges too much. It's not too hard that you really have to press down to sort of make a darker line. And since the majority of the work that I do, I ink myself, the pencils don't have to really be so tight. As far as inking, I mean, I use a lot of drafting pens. I mean, this is like a Prismacolor one. Anything that makes a line really is all I'm concerned with. For a long time, I stayed away from brush pens because the tips were crap and they would run out of ink, but these are refillable. What I do is I keep the ones where the action goes out of the tip because I use those for just big fills and dry brush effects. It's all a function of what your goal is, which is to make people feel something. So, you know, if we could figure out another way to do it, you know, if I were better with words, if I were better with any other way of doing it, then I would probably do it that way. But it's like you just realize that that's your way of doing it.